A cold wind moves through the narrow streets of New York as night slowly takes control of the city. The lights from tall buildings glow above, but far below on the sidewalk, a young girl walks with no clear place to go. Her name is Liz Murray, and at this moment, she owns almost nothing. No safe home, no stable family, no warm bed waiting for her tonight. Only a small bag with a few belongings, and a mind filled with questions about how life became this way. Liz was not born into comfort or stability. She was born into chaos. Her parents loved her, but they were trapped in addiction. Drugs controlled their lives and slowly destroyed the fragile structure of their home. The apartment where Liz grew up was often dark, messy, and silent except for the sound of arguments or the heavy quiet that follows despair. Food was never guaranteed. Electricity was sometimes gone, and days passed where the outside world felt distant and unreachable. But even in that broken home, Liz was a curious child. She loved learning. She loved the feeling of discovering something new in a book or hearing a teacher explain a story that opened another world inside her imagination. School became her small escape, a place where for a few hours she could forget the confusion waiting at home. As the years passed, the problems around her grew heavier. Her parents struggled more deeply with addiction. Their health faded, their energy disappeared, bills went unpaid, and the apartment slowly began to fall apart. The walls seemed to close in around a life that had very little structure. One day, everything changed forever. Liz was still young when her mother became very sick. The illness was connected to years of addiction, and the body that once carried her through life could no longer fight back. Hospitals replaced home, and uncertainty replaced the little stability that remained. When her mother passed away, Liz felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The person who had always been there, even in the chaos, was suddenly gone. Grief entered her life quietly but powerfully, and with it came a reality she could no longer ignore. The apartment was no longer a place she could stay. Bills were unpaid, responsibilities were impossible to manage, and Liz found herself standing outside with nowhere to go. Homelessness did not arrive like a loud storm. It arrived slowly, quietly, like a shadow growing longer every day. At first, she stayed with friends. Sometimes she slept on a couch, sometimes on the floor of a crowded apartment. Sometimes she stayed awake all night because there was no space for her to rest comfortably. She carried her life in a small bag, moving from place to place, hoping not to become a burden to anyone. New York was a city full of millions of people, yet loneliness surrounded her everywhere. Crowded subway trains rushed through tunnels, while she watched strangers disappear into lives that seemed stable and secure. Many nights, Liz walked the streets long after midnight, watching lights in apartment windows, wondering what it felt like to belong somewhere. Sometimes, she found herself sitting on subway platforms where the constant rumble of trains became the soundtrack of survival. The cold air moved through the station, and people rushed past her without knowing the story she carried. Hunger was a constant companion. Some days, she found small meals through kindness or luck. Other days, she simply waited for morning, hoping the next day might be easier. The hardest part was not only the physical struggle, but the quiet fear that maybe this life would never change. Many people in her situation slowly give up. Dreams fade under the weight of survival, but somewhere deep inside, Liz carried a stubborn belief that life could still become something different. One day she looked around at the streets, the noise, the endless movement of a city that never paused, and she asked herself a question that would quietly reshape her future. What if this is not the end of the story? The idea seemed almost impossible. She had no home, no money, no stable family, and very little support, but she remembered something from her childhood, the feeling she had in school when learning opened doors inside her mind. Education had once been her escape. Maybe it could become her way forward. Returning to school felt like climbing a mountain while carrying the weight of the world. Liz had already missed large amounts of education. Her life had been too unstable for consistent learning. Teachers had come and gone in her life, and many opportunities had slipped away. But she decided she would try. She enrolled in an alternative high school that allowed students with difficult pasts to rebuild their academic path. The classrooms were simple, and the environment was filled with students who had also faced challenges. For the first time in years, Liz felt a spark of direction. She studied harder than anyone expected, not because she was naturally gifted, but because she understood something many people never learn. Education was not just information, it was freedom. While other students returned home after school, Liz often returned to uncertainty. Some nights, she still had no stable place to sleep. She continued to move between temporary spaces, carrying books everywhere she went. When libraries closed and apartments were crowded, she sometimes studied in subway stations, reading under bright artificial lights while trains roared through the tunnels. Strangers walked past her without knowing that the young girl sitting quietly with a book was fighting one of the hardest battles imaginable. Every page she read was a step away from the streets. Every lesson was a reminder that her past did not have to define her future. Teachers slowly began to notice her determination. They saw a student who refused to surrender even when life offered every reason to stop. One teacher encouraged her to aim higher than she ever imagined. College. The word felt distant, almost unreal. College was something people with stable homes and strong financial support pursued. Liz had none of those things. But the idea refused to leave her mind. If education was freedom, then college could be the door that led to a completely different life. She began studying with even greater intensity, days blurred together with nights filled with reading, writing, and absorbing knowledge as quickly as possible. Her goal was clear: graduate high school faster than anyone expected, and then try for something almost impossible: an application to one of the most respected universities in the world, Harvard. The name alone carried centuries of prestige and excellent. Students from wealthy families with perfect academic backgrounds dreamed of attending. Liz Murray was a homeless teenager studying in subway stations. But dreams do not ask permission from circumstance. They simply appear in the heart and wait to see if courage will follow. When the time came to apply, Liz wrote about her life with honesty and courage. She described the chaos of addiction, the pain of losing her mother, the loneliness of homelessness, and the determination that pushed her forward. Her story was not polished or comfortable. It was raw, real, and deeply human. Admissions officers reading her application encountered more than grades or achievements. They encountered a story of survival. Days passed, then weeks, and the future remained uncertain. Then one moment changed everything. Liz received the letter. She opened it slowly, unsure if her hands were shaking from fear or hope. Inside was the message that would transform her life. She had been accepted to Harvard University. The same girl who once slept on subway platforms would now walk through the historic gates of one of the most respected institutions on earth. The news felt almost unreal. Years of struggle, loneliness, hunger, and uncertainty had led to this moment. But the journey did not end there. Attending Harvard brought new challenges. Academic expectations were intense, and many students around her came from privileged backgrounds with experiences very different from her own. At first, she felt like an outsider walking through a world she had only imagined from far away. But Liz carried something powerful that could not be taught in any classroom: resilience. She had survived nights without shelter. She had studied while facing uncertainty that most students could never imagine. Compared to the challenges of homelessness, the difficulty of university felt like a battle she was ready to fight. She worked tirelessly, attending lectures, reading late into the night, and embracing every opportunity to grow. Slowly, the campus that once felt intimidating became a place where she truly belonged. Her story began spreading beyond the university. People were inspired by the journey of a young woman who refused to surrender to the circumstances of her birth. Journalists wrote about her life. Speakers invited her to share her experiences. Students looked at her and realized that success is not always born from comfort. Sometimes it rises from the deepest struggles. Liz eventually graduated, proving that the path from homelessness to one of the most respected universities in the world was not only possible, but real. But the most powerful chapter of her story was still unfolding. She chose not to keep her journey private. Instead, she began sharing it with audiences around the world. Standing on stages, speaking to thousands of people, Liz told the truth about struggle, loss, hope, and determination. She reminded people that circumstances do not have to define identity. A person can begin life in chaos and still create a future filled with purpose. Her voice carried authenticity because every word came from lived experience. When she spoke about cold nights without shelter, people listened. When she described studying under the bright lights of subway stations, audiences felt the weight of those moments. And when she spoke about opening the letter from Harvard, hope filled the room. Her life became more than a personal success story. It became a symbol A reminder that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can choose to move forward. Somewhere tonight, another young person may be walking through a difficult chapter of life, feeling invisible, uncertain, and afraid that the future holds nothing but more struggle. But stories like Liz Murray's travel across cities, across countries, and across generations. They reach people who need to hear one simple truth. Your beginning does not decide your ending. The streets that once felt like the final destination of her life became only the first chapter of a much greater story. And every step she took from those cold subway platforms toward the halls of Harvard carried a message that continues to echo today. No matter how difficult the starting point may be, hope can still rise, determination can still grow, and a single decision to keep moving forward can change everything. Because sometimes the most extraordinary success stories begin in the places where the world least expects them. And sometimes a homeless girl studying beneath the bright lights of a subway station becomes living proof that resilience can rewrite destiny and turn the impossible into reality.